Okay, so hello everyone, a very good afternoon. At the outset, I bow low in the lotus feet of Almighty for His unbounded grace, guidance, and blessings for providing us the opportunity to organize this webinar on graphene oxide, prospects and challenges. I request Honorable Principal, St. John's College, Agra, Professor S.P. Singh to kindly lead us in the prayer and say a few words of blessings.
Let us pray. O God, in whom is the fountain of all life, knowledge, wisdom, and goodness, enrich us by your benign presence and bless this webinar so that our minds may be nourished by the knowledge and deeper understanding of the truths that you bring to us. Amen. I take this opportunity to congratulate the Department of Physics for hosting this webinar. And on behalf of the college, I would like to extend very warm welcome to the resource person for the day, Dr. Ajay Thakur from IIT Patna. We know that graphene oxide has a lot of industrial applications, and we really eagerly look forward to this enlightening presentation. I hope and sincerely wish that today's deliberations would really leave us all enriched. Thank you.
So it's a pleasure for the Department of Physics to organize this webinar, and we are hopeful that we will come with many more in the future. I feel very happy announcing that we got a very encouraging response from the students to attend the webinar and exceeded the number of participants before we could close the registration form. Therefore, we are also streaming up the webinar on YouTube, and several students are watching the webinar through our YouTube live streaming. On behalf of the Department of Physics, I, Sonal Sahai, welcome all the faculty members and student participants who have joined us from St. John's College, Dayal Bagh Educational Institute, Institute of Basic Sciences, Dao Dayal Institute of Vocational Education, Agra, College, University of Delhi, Jamia Millia Islamia, Delhi, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, Gorakhpur University, St. Andrews, Gorakhpur, RMT MNU, Nagpur University, IIT Indore, NIT Warangal and Surat, RJ College, Mumbai University, Bose Institute, Calcutta University, Savitribai Phule, Pune University, Slope College, Rajki Engineering College, Sri Shivaji College, and Dr. RML Avadi University. We are also overwhelmed with joy by the presence of our principal, Professor S.P. Singh, who has always been very encouraging for us to take up new challenges. Welcome you, sir. I also welcome our Chief Resource Person, Dr. Ajay Thakur, who has very kindly accepted our invitation to inspire and enlighten the student participants in the recent trends of physics. Now I request Dr. Lizzie M. Thomas, Head, Department of Physics, to kindly introduce and formally welcome our Chief Resource Person, Dr. Ajay Thakur.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. The Department of Physics, St. John's College, Agra, takes it as a great opportunity to organize this webinar in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. In the lockdown period, it is expected from everyone to stay home, to stay safe. But the process of learning should not come to a standstill. Therefore, we decided to engage our students and faculty by holding a webinar. It is very generous of Dr. Ajay Thakur, an associate professor at IIT Patna, who very enthusiastically agreed to deliver this lecture on the topic graphene oxides, prospects and challenges. Achievement lies within the reach of those who reach beyond themselves. Dr. Ajay Thakur is one such a person. He is a wonderful teacher and a learned physicist. After completing his PG from IIT Mumbai in the year 2000, and PhD from TIFR Mumbai in 2007. He worked at the Department of Physics, IIT Mumbai, and National Institute for Material Science, Senegal, Japan, before finally joining IIT Patna in 2011. He has many awards to his credit, such as a gold medal in the prestigious National Graduate Physics Exam, NGP, TIFR Graduate School Fellowship, Kanwal Rekhi Fellowship, Outstanding Reviewer Award by Elsevier, and Best Physics Teacher Award in IIT Patna for the last 2 consecutive years, that is for the years 2018 and 19. Dr. Ajay has handled many government-sponsored research projects successfully and published many research papers in journals of repute. Dr. Ajay, we are honored to have you amidst us and we welcome you, sir. Participants, I'm sure you will be enlightened by this lecture. Please be attentive, as in the end you will have to fill a feedback form and answer some questions based on the topic. Thank you, everyone. Now I request Dr. Ajay to please take charge of the session. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Now you can share your screen, Ajay, sir.
Yeah, okay.
I encourage Zoom participants to keep writing their queries and questions in the chat box, and we will be putting up your questions before Dr. Thakur in the end of the talk. Kindly do not write anything else than the questions. And I also request our YouTube participants that they should email us their questions and queries so that we can take those questions in the end of this talk. So over to you, Dr. Ajay Thakur.
Yeah. Okay, so I have been initial technical glitch. Let me start by thanking Professor Singh, Professor Thomas, and Professor Sahai for making this webinar possible. As the title suggests, like it is on graphene oxide prospects and challenges, because this is some area which our group has been pursuing for a while. And when Sonal asked me about possibility of giving a talk, I suggested that this is something which our group is kind of interested in, and I could deliver a talk. But soon it took turns in a manner that Sonal told me that she has already sent the like invitations, and now there are going to be several UG students in addition to PG students. So while the earlier plan was only for ensuring that MSc and PhD students are going to be the audience, eventually we had UG students. So accordingly, I had tried to make like some kind of a balance between the pedagogical content and the research content, so that the talk is more or less accessible to even UG students, while not being completely useless for the MSc and PhD students. So the research theme in our lab is primarily to deal with physics-driven functional materials and technologies. And like some of the areas that we have been working in could be summarized via the kind of, so let me just choose a spot. Via the kind of work the PhD students who have been doing in recent past. So Ashutosh Kumar was a PhD student who worked on thermoelectric materials, and Pranay worked on 2D materials, including the part of the work which I'm going to discuss today. And Atul has worked on photovoltaic materials and kind of design of photovoltaic cells, in addition to the experimental part. Apurva, Mohak, and Chaitanya and Karuna, they are currently the PhD students who are working in my lab. Above 3 have graduated, and Sunil, Indranil, and Rahul are new students who have recently joined. So for those of you who have not seen or not had visited IIT Patna, so this is our main building at the center, and at the top center. And at the bottom left, you see the tutorial block and then some of the other blocks. The hostels are shown on the bottom right. Yeah. So currently in our department, we have 16 faculty colleagues, out of which there is a interesting distribution across various areas of physics, from optical encryption, biophotonics, soft condensed matter, atomic molecular physics, DEC and cold atom, to hard condensed matter physics and high energy. So in today's talk, I would start with a background discussing a brief history of 2D materials and some of the old paradigms which got broken when the so-called first 2D material in the form of graphene was discovered. Then we go on to motivate why graphene oxide is interesting. What is the difference between graphene and graphene oxide? And then talk about our relevant contributions. If time permits, I will also discuss about understanding certain caveats and to see if we really understand graphene oxide and what kind of work is required, what kind of future work is required. So most of the work that I'm going to discuss today is like done in the thesis work of Pranay Ranjan, and Apurva Sinha is a current student who is pursuing on this line, continuing with it. So materials are indispensable for technological developments, and you can see you require interesting materials for applications including electronics, biomedicine, structural materials, energy, environment, and any other area that you see. There are materials are indispensable. And as materials make everything, like for kind of applications which have a larger volume of usage, like clean energy, clean water, and in near future, Internet of Things, it becomes all the more important to have a judicious choice of material ingredients so that the load on the ecological part is and the environment is kind of minimal. Not only that, these materials have to be earth abundant in character, like the ingredient should be earth abundant. The processing technology has to be cost effective, and the overall approach should be scalable so that like at the end applications could be implemented. So in like historically, we know that whenever humankind discovered new material, we enabled a new technology and society changed. So we already are aware of Stone Age, going to Bronze Age, going to Iron Age, going over to the Silicon Age. And we have been beneficiaries of the fruits of these technological innovations. And the question here is like, what is next? So is it going to be graphene age or 2D material age or a similar scenario? And here, a synergy between basic sciences and technology presents a tremendous scope. So to summarize very briefly the history of physics of 2D materials, initially, strictly 2D crystals were supposed to be, or were kind of in fact shown to be, thermodynamically unstable. And therefore, there was a strong proposition like from the likes of Landau and Peierls and a whole bunch of other researchers who followed suit, that in fact 2D crystals will not exist. And the same argument also went forward to be true for 1D systems. So in fact, what happens is there is a divergent contribution of thermal fluctuations in low dimensional crystal lattices, and that leads to displacements of atoms which are larger than the atomic spacing, interatomic distances, at any finite temperature. And therefore the material system is unstable. And that leads to essentially a melting of the so-called 2D material. So this has been observed in past. For example, melting temperature of thin films rapidly increases with decreasing thickness, and the film become unstable at a thickness of typically dozens of atomic layers. And atomic monolayers were anticipated only as an integral part of a larger three-dimensional scheme of things, usually grown either epitaxially on top of a crystalline substrate or to lie within a given matrix. So therefore, like this 2D material was really something which was considered to be inconceivable in practical reality. Not only that, a host of other very influential theoretical work by Mermin, Wagner, Hohenberg, Werezinski extended this non-existence of crystalline order to the proposition that in 2 dimensions or lower dimensions than 2, no kind of magnetic ordering will also persist. So therefore, like this was some area where not many people appeared to be very keen or very interested. However, of course, science progresses or technology progresses via leap of faith of individuals, and indeed we witness 2D material, some of the story which I would be telling. So in addition, magnetism typically requires elements from D and F block of periodic table, right? And magnetism in carbon-based system is therefore unexpected because this is purely an S block element, and pure sp3, sp2 or sp hybridized carbon does not provide the lone pair of electrons required for the origin of magnetism. So therefore, whenever there was any experimental signature, like even pre-2000s, there have been several reports where people have observed magnetic behavior in carbon-based materials. It was simply ruled out, saying that it must be due to some kind of an impurity. And same way, despite long-standing work of a set of theoreticians and experimentalists, where they even showed evidences for existence of 2D character in certain carbon-based material systems. One of the important works in this direction was by the group of Dresselhaus at MIT, and this was in late 70s. But despite all this, it was not in vogue until these two gentlemen, Geim and Novoselov, they kind of came up with this idea of trying to prepare like very thin layer of carbon material. So the way they started was they took a highly oriented pyrolytic graphite, and then using a Scotch tape, they try to peel off the one of the carbon layers, and then via successive peeling, Novoselov was able to reach really single layer type kind of a thickness. And then when properties were measured, extremely like fantastic properties, including very high mobility of about 100 meters square per volt second, where you can compare this with silicon. So silicon is about 1/700 times this mobility. This was the thinnest material, but with highest mechanical strength. So this mechanical strength was about 5 times stronger than steel, while this material being much more lighter. This was an extremely good conductor of heat, about 40 times that of silicon, and extremely high current densities could be sustained, as high as 10 to the power 13 ampere per meter square. Besides this, graphene also was shown to have very high optical transparency, second only to maybe quartz, and interesting physics for advanced devices. For example, it may become superconducting under specific circumstances. So recently, like people are trying to look at bilayer graphene, where a layer of graphene is kind of twisted with respect to another layer. And then people are seeing very exotic condensed matter phases in this. So a lot of this work happened very fast as soon as Geim and Novoselov demonstrated existence of graphene. And therefore, this was rightly recognized via a Nobel Prize in Physics in 2010. So what happens to this argument by Landau, Peierls, and a gang of other theoreticians and other physicists? So it so turns out that even this graphene, which is which Novoselov and Geim made, that is stable on a substrate. So eventually you need to put it onto a silicon dioxide substrate where the substrate really takes a lot amount of elastic energy, or bears the elastic energy cost, thereby ensuring that the thermal fluctuations does not lead to disintegration of this carbon layer. In addition, if people try to exfoliate it in liquid, it has been seen that graphene develops wrinkles. So essentially it develops a quasi 2D character. So there is a small modulation along the third direction, and therefore this idea of Landau and Peierls still holds, because true graphene in its freestanding form does develop wrinkles and it is quasi 2D. However, substrate becomes a very important parameter here, and eventual work showed that interesting substrates like hexagonal boron nitride could be the ideal choice for making high quality graphene. So here, I show a typical work from Ferrari et al., where of course it takes a very sharp eye to figure out that so this entire layering has been done on a silicon dioxide surface. So a thin silicon dioxide film grown on top of silicon, and on top of the silicon dioxide layer, graphene has been transferred. And then one can see this SLG, which is essentially the single layer graphene region, where you can see a slight change in transparency. Then there is bilayer graphene, and then there are all kinds of 5 layer, 6 layer, 7 layer, and so on. And very soon people develop technologies to figure out the classification of single layer to multi-layer graphene via looking at the full width half maximum of the corresponding 2D peak in Raman spectroscopy. So therefore, graphene turned out to be a real material and with lot of interesting applications. So several goals were planned and projected, and it is seen that by 2020, lot of goals related to kind of basic research are supposed to be kind of achieved. And then translational research has to start. And by 2024 or later, they should come into true applications. And these applications would range widely from biomedical applications, composites, energy storage and generation, flexible electronics, sensors, photonics, optoelectronics, spintronics, electronic devices, and so on. So here, for the benefit of UG students, let me just start with talking about, looking at what we are really talking about. So on the screen, you see a benzene ring, right? And benzene molecule is a very thin, okay, so benzene molecule is a very thin and flat disk with thickness less than 1 nanometer. And here, the bigger circles, black circles, these are carbon atoms, and these blue circles are these hydrogen atoms. On the contrary, if we simply extend this carbon hexagon in all the 2 dimensions, means both the dimensions, then what you see is an extended carbon plane, and this is what is graphene. right? So a graphene would primarily comprise of carbon atoms connected in this kind of a honeycomb network, right? Each of these unit cell is like a honeycomb, or like you can also say hexagon, but like basically the symmetry says it is a honeycomb arranged in a manner on a triangular lattice. So honeycombs are arranged on triangular lattice, and so basically, like if I ask a question that how much of graphene do we need to cover a surface of a typical football field? So this will give us a rough idea of what kind of a material are we talking of. So a typical football field is about 7,000 square meters in area. And we note that about 6 into 10 to the power 23 carbon atoms, that is 1 mole of carbon atoms, weighs about 12 grams. So now we can divide this into some kind of a unit cells. And then what we see that if we look at a single hexagon, then each of these hexagon is shared, like each of the atoms on this hexagon are shared by 3 other hexagons. So overall, per hexagon, there are going to be 6 into 1 by 3, which is about 2 atoms. And this area of this hexagon, in case like A is the separation between 2 carbon atoms, then this like area of this hexagon is going to be about 6 into √3 by 4 into that carbon-carbon distance square, and carbon-carbon distance is about 0.14 nanometer. So therefore, this area of a hexagon is roughly about 0.05 nanometer square. And therefore, like if we try to now estimate how many carbon atoms do we need, so essentially this is going to be 2 carbon atoms per hexagon into the total area divided by area of a hexagon, right? So that would essentially tell us how many carbon atoms are there. And this will lead us to a number which is about 2.856 into 10 to the power 23. So therefore, the amount of graphene that we will need is this number divided by the Avogadro number into the mass of a given Avogadro number of carbon atoms, that is 12. So that is about 5.712 grams. So a minute quantity as 5.712 grams, which is less than the amount of salt a typical person consumes in a day, like you can effectively layer a football field. So these that is the kind of material that we are talking about. Now with graphene, there are several interesting things which follow. So if we look at this like this lattice, or if we imagine this as some kind of a Bravais lattice, not all directions are equivalent. And there are directions, say, as marked by these green lines, where you have carbons going in a zigzag fashion. So along these zigzag directions, graphene is supposed to be metallic. So graphene will not be metallic at, say, a direction where you are seeing some kind of an armchair. So over here, one can see that you are going into a kind of a dip and then up, and a dip and an up. And so therefore this direction is called the armchair direction. So along this direction, graphene is supposed to be insulating. So how many such metallic directions do we have in a typical graphene sheet? So we can see that if we start at any carbon atom, we come across a direction which is the zigzag direction. And then starting with the same, we come across another zigzag direction, yet another zigzag direction, yet another, and overall there are 6 zigzag directions, right, around about which this graphene is supposed to be metallic in character. In a similar manner, if we it is not very hard to see that about a given carbon atom, if you look for armchair directions, you will again hit upon 6 such armchair directions. And this has something this has very interesting implications. So however, this does not mean that if you connect two ends of a graphene sheet along the armchair direction, it will not conduct. So that's not really true, because there are infinitely many conducting paths. So one can, for example, so let me see if I can annotate it. Okay, so suppose I have to go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. I can go along a zigzag direction and then choose another zigzag direction that connects me to the other end. But this is not unique. I could have instead chosen to travel all the way in zigzag direction along this. At some point decided to deviate and then deviate along this, further deviate, right? And then deviate again, further deviate. So therefore, like I can make, as the this pointer shows, I can move along variety of directions, say along this. This is yet another like this, and then overall along to the other direction. So there are many ways in which I can connect one end of graphene sheet to another, and therefore like conduction is possible. Okay, so if we look at a typical like a small section of this picture, and we are asked what would be the primitive lattice vectors, or what would be the typical lattice vectors which will span the entire graphene lattice, right? So one can construct quantities A1 and A2 in terms of A, right? Some parameter A, and write this as √3/2A, A/2, and √3/2A minus A/2 in a manner such that the magnitude of A1 is identical to magnitude of A2, and that is equals to A, and which is equals to √3 times the carbon-carbon distance, and which is about 2.46 angstroms. So this is about so √3 into √3 into 0.14. Yeah, so I'll have to check this. Yeah, I will come back to this point later. So correspondingly, the unit vectors in the reciprocal lattice B1 and B2 are given by 2 pi by √3a, 2 pi by a, and B2 by 2 pi by √3a minus 2 pi by a. So one has to note that this AIs, which are the lattice vectors in, or unit vectors in the real space, and this BIs, which are the unit vectors in the reciprocal space, they satisfy this condition. AI dot BJ is 2 pi delta Ij. So like following some more so when we try to plot this B1 and B2, we generate so-called reciprocal space picture of this lattice, which again turns out to be a similar lattice with honeycomb-like cells. And like we will come to these specific notations gamma, m, and k in a more elaborate manner in a later slide. So I would highly recommend UG students and PG students to go through this particular book, which is Physical Properties of Carbon Nanotubes. So this book was written roughly a decade before graphene was discovered. But you would be surprised to see that the authors, like particularly Mildred Dresselhaus, she died just a year and a half ago. And she had a very illustrative career of working on carbon-based systems. So they had essentially done a lot of theoretical work, which would go a long way in quickly understanding graphene as soon as Novoselov and Geim demonstrated its formation. In particular, like after little algebra, one can show that this energy dispersion would be given by this function, where like t is the hopping parameter. So basically, this is how nicely an electron can jump from one side to another side, and which electron is jumping. So in this arrangement of carbon atoms, carbons are connected to 3 other carbons via sp2 bonding, and then there is an extra carbon, like one of the electrons which is like free to move up above, like, and then like that is available for carrying the current, right? So in this particular case, like if we are seeing this subscript V and C, so V stands for the valence and C for conduction band. And if we try to plot it, so this particular plot is generated using Mathematica today morning for this talk. And you can see that one can have this 6 nearly equivalent points. So first of all, let me tell you that this bounding box corresponds to about 1.5 times the Brillouin zone. So basically the points at which like we are marking the ends of a hexagon, like that corresponds in this picture to about plus pi by a and minus pi by a. The extreme values corresponds to plus pi by a and minus pi by a. And what we have done is we have created a bounding box which is about 1.5 times this Brillouin zone, and we find like this 6 equivalent points here, which we will call the K points or the K prime points. And then in between 2 K points, there is a saddle point. So saddle points are ones in which along one direction you will go down, and along another orthogonal direction you will go up. So these saddle points are called respectively the end points, right? And the topmost point here is called the gamma point. And accordingly, like in this picture, the like the bottom layer is essentially the pi bond, and the top layer is called the pi star band, like pi band and pi star band. And if we are careful to see, so this top picture corresponds to the pi star band, where this red is having the highest altitude and blue is having the lowest altitude. On the other hand, like here in the pi band, you can see that this blue is having the lowest altitude, and this brown is having the highest altitude again. But now these browns are at the K points. So this is corresponding to the top of the valence band. And in this case, these points corresponds to the bottom of the conduction band. And if one zooms this, one gets a dispersion, like one gets a kind of double cone-like structure. So in the vicinity of this is having a cone-like structure, which is called cone. And then these are the 6 equivalent points about which the system has a metallic character. And then this M points are the ones where you can see there is a natural gap which occurs. So if we are looking at these M points, so when we go from the pi band to the pi star band, there is a finite gap, and this is insulating in. So like with this preliminary introduction, right, let me come to like what are the popular methods for synthesizing graphene. So like graphene primarily has three very popular methods of synthesizing. The first one is an exfoliation technique, and even there micromechanical exfoliation is most popular. This is the same technique which Geim and Novoselov used to make their first graphene samples. So here a scotch tape is used to peel off layers of carbon from a graphite sheet, and then that is transferred onto a silicon substrate or a silicon dioxide over silicon substrate. And then one can make these graphene using exfoliation, mechanical exfoliation. People have also developed other techniques, including liquid phase exfoliation and laser shock exfoliation, eventually to improve upon the yield and dimensions of the exfoliated samples. The other technique is the chemical vapor deposition grown graphene. So in this, what is basically done is you take a metallic substrate. So in this case, it is copper. And then inside a chemical reactor, you send in control amount of a hydrocarbon. And then you kind of decompose it so that the carbon from that deposits onto the metal substrate and forms a layer. And via controlling the growth parameters, one can ensure that large areas of monolayer of carbon is grown on top of copper substrate. And that's how the first reports of CVD grown graphene came about. And then once you grow a monolayer of graphene on top of copper, and depending on requirement, maybe bilayer or multi-layer of graphene, you spin coat a polymethyl methacrylate layer on top of it. So basically it is now a copper layer on top of which there is a graphene layer, and on top of which there is a PMMA layer. And then one etches out this copper in iron chloride solution so that the entire copper is removed, and then one is left with a lamella of graphene on top of PMMA sheet, right? And then one takes this lamella and transfers it onto a silicon dioxide surface, and at the end the PMMA is washed away using a suitable solvent, like typically acetone, so that the graphene is now coated on top of silicon dioxide layer. And a third technique is where one uses a category of stacked silicon carbide called the 6H silicon carbide. So when we are saying stacked, it is the same kind of, you have to understand it in a similar manner as we talk of AB stacking of A layer on top of B layer on top of A layer, and ABBA or ABBA, and so on. So here, like 6H is special here. So this is typically stacked silicon carbide substrate. And then one does a heat treatment such that the epi layer is a termination of a carbon layer, carbon monolayer, which is essentially a graphene on top of silicon carbide. So that's another method of making graphene. However, the purpose of talking about all these three methods in so much of detail is to show that the first one has a relatively lower yield, right? The second method, CVD grown method, is really cumbersome and also expensive. And the third method is very specialized. You cannot grow graphene or make graphene on any other substrate. So therefore, this is very specific, and at the same time, it is very expensive. So therefore, alternate methods for making graphene is desirable. So this was the time when our group was getting into this business. This was around 2016, when we came across this paper in Science where people have shown that high quality graphene via microwave reduction of solution exfoliated graphene oxide. So these people essentially used variety of reduction techniques and eventually settled down on microwave reduction technique, and then made reduced graphene oxide, which mimicked in property very close to that of so they reached very high quality graphene like reduced graphene oxide samples. However, one of the biggest challenges after this work was to be able to make high quality graphene oxide through low cost non-explosive technique. Right. So when I say low cost non-explosive technique, before that, we have to understand what is graphene oxide. So graphene oxide is essentially prepared via intercalation and oxidation followed by exfoliation of graphite. So what is being done is very strong oxidizing agents are intercalated in between the interstices of two carbon layers within graphite. In graphite, you know that the C-axis spacing is much larger than the AB plane spacing. So within this interstices or interspace, these oxidizing species are introduced, and then they eventually get attached to some of these carbon atoms. So the carbon changes its character from sp2 to sp3 locally, and because of this, eventually there is an expansion of the lattice. And once the lattice has expanded, the van der Waals interaction along the C-axis weakens, and it can be exfoliated very easily. So therefore, what one ends up getting is a layer of carbon where certain carbons have these oxidative species attached. So these oxidative species attach in the form of various oxygen-containing functional groups, like it could be a say carboxylic acid group, it could be a OCO group, it could be kind of CH group, and occasionally it can also be a CH group. So therefore, a graphene oxide essentially is a carbon sheet like graphene, where a number of carbon atoms have oxygen-containing functional groups in general, and some of them may also have hydrogen-containing functional groups. Okay, and the reduction of this essentially means that what you are trying to do is break the bonds with these functional groups. So you would try to remove these functional groups which are attached to the carbon layer, and then at the end of the reduction process, you reach reduced graphene oxide. So in between, this graphene oxide could be transferred onto a substrate or onto flexible surfaces, onto whichever end application you would like to go for, and then reduction is implemented so that you have properties very close to graphene, and the method is highly scalable. It does not suffer from issues related to yield, does not suffer from cost issues, and does not suffer from scalability issues. So here I would come to this point of scalable synthesis of graphene oxide. And interestingly, just like the story of graphene, where a lot of researchers were aiming to make graphene-like materials or graphene for a long period of time. Similarly, graphene oxide was not something which came suddenly after the discovery of graphene. Rather, a lot of groups were working as early as 1859. But one of the biggest problems with their method of synthesis was the steps involved in the synthesis were highly explosive. So that really inhibited its use in industrial applications, because whenever we would like to make it for large scale applications, we have to make it in large amount, And then explosive nature of the reaction was a strict no-no. In addition, there was also toxic gas which was emitted. And then there were also residues, like particularly manganese residues in techniques where potassium permanganate was used as one of the oxidizing agents. And apart from this, optimizing time was another criteria, and so on. So therefore, like we tried to go ahead with, I think somebody has started writing on top of the screen. Clear all drawings. Yeah, so our method was primarily aiming non-explosive, free from toxic gases, free from MN residues, cost effective, and a technique which would increase the yield. So like this is a rough summary of how we proceeded with the steps. So here it is interesting to see that a large part of these steps were eventually proposed by Tours Group in 2010. Right, so they had essentially done a KMNO4 based synthesis approach, and they claimed it to be non-explosive. Whereas whenever we try to replicate it in lab, it will always be explosive in character. And once we were in the process of publishing our result, indeed Tour also came up with a, Tours Group also came up with a correction that indeed their process was explosive in the manner it was reported. So therefore, for us, it was a challenge to make sure that this explosive character in Tours method is also removed. And what we did was we utilized a pre-cooling protocol in the initial steps of this reaction. So whenever, so this reaction goes in the following steps. So we take graphite as the source of carbon, and that is grinded, and then we mix it with potassium permanganate, and then to this is added mixture of H2SO4 and H3PO4, and H3PO4 is added to H2SO4 to make a milder acid. And then while this is mixed, prior to that, both the starting mixtures are cooled to about 5 degrees C, and then after that, once it is these are mixed, followed by heating, and then finally the reaction is terminated by adding hydrogen peroxide. So for researchers entering into this field or a related field, it is important to not ignore simple techniques like X-ray diffraction. Right, so X-ray diffraction has a lot of strength in helping you try to decipher the mechanism of reaction and so on, and that is what we employed it for. So what we did was, after each sub-step of our reaction, we would try to wash the product, and then we would take XRD and see what stage is the reaction in. So there were many more intermediate XRDs. I am showing 3 for representative purposes. And then via this, what we could zero in on was the most important steps which were relevant in growth of graphene oxide. Okay, and at the bottom, we are showing the ICDD stick diagrams for variety of materials, starting from carbon, graphite, MnO, MnO2, all the other oxides of manganese, MnSO4, etc. And also the graphene oxide. So graphene oxide peak is typically about 10 degrees. So this is unique. So what has been done is, as we plotted this, we could figure out what kind of secondary phases are persisting, and eventually with what kind of a treatment most of these secondary phases are eliminated. And then we tried to play around with the other parameters, including temperature and time, and on a log scale reached a scenario where we could see that there are no secondary peaks. So only the graphene oxide peak was observed. So XRD was really exhaustively used in our experiments to ensure that we are reaching the right phase and right conditions for preparation of this. So this was followed by doing FTIR for looking at the functional groups which are attached to the sp2 carbon backbone. So we found that groups like CO, CC, COH, COC, and CO, C single bond O, were predominantly the functional groups, and also was the OH group. And on top is shown a typical Raman spectra where what is being shown is the intensity as a function of wave number. And here we see two distinct peaks, one called the G peak and the other called the D peak. So G peak is basically the in-plane, like showing the in-plane vibration, and D peak corresponds to the out-of-plane vibrations. And not only that, D is a measure of, because it corresponds to the out-of-plane vibrations, this is more sensitive to any additional functional group which is attached to the carbon backbone. Not only that, any kind of defect which exists in the basic carbon layer, that is also captured by this DP. So this DG like structure was characteristic of a very high quality graphene oxide reported by the earlier methods, like those which unfortunately had explosive nature. So here we see a typical SEM image in panel A for a sheet of graphene oxide deposited onto a substrate. And like this is the kind of wrinkles or crumples which I was talking of. So in case of graphene, like which is freestanding or in a solvent, these kind of wrinkles are natural, or wrinkles or folds are natural. And the similar kind of a behavior is also seen in graphene oxide. On the top right are shown selective area electron diffraction pattern, where what we have done is tried to look at SAED patterns in the fold region as well as in the region where it is flat. So what we see is indeed the degree of order in the flat region is higher, because you can see the six-fold symmetric spots, which was not very visible in the top panel. And across this fold, following is the TEM image. AFM was also performed, and AFM was essentially performed to look at whether we are getting monolayer graphene oxide. So a typical thickness about 1.4 nanometer is the one which corresponds to the graphene oxide monolayer. And similarly, we could also see very thick layers as well. So all kinds of thicknesses were seen. Not only that, like it was interesting to capture these wrinkles, so and their frequency. So one can see that if you take a large enough sample area, then one can move across these wrinkles and see the occurrence of these wrinkled regions. Okay. So the next thing in line was try to see like what are the various properties of these graphene oxide that we made. So one of the preliminary tests was to make a 4-probe contact on this graphene oxide. And because graphene oxide is highly insulating in character, unlike graphene, what we did was we started reducing graphene oxide so that gradually we could see current emerging at voltages as small as 1 volt, and then one could see that at 2 volts one could see significant currents after a reduction via exposing to UV light. So in this case, what was done was, so after making a 4-probe contact, we put it in a controlled environment of UV light illumination. And then as time progressed, like as a function of time of UV irradiation, we took IV characteristics systematically. And from this data itself at the bottom panel is shown how, as a function of time of exposure to UV, the current gradually starts increasing. And suddenly, at about 6,000 seconds of exposure, beyond that, there is an avalanche. So now after that, as we go to 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, like the current generated is very, very high. Okay, and therefore we are, through UV reduction, we are able to achieve very high quality reduced graphene oxide samples. Here we have shown the avalanche region. On the top right panel, we are showing X-ray photoemission spectroscopy data, and this is primarily to compare how our reduced graphene oxide compares with graphene. And you can see the comparison of red curve with the blue curve, and this black curve corresponded to the parent graphene oxide sample which was made. And similarly, in the bottom layer, like bottom panel, we show Raman spectrum for a variety of samples starting from as-grown GO to RGO to multi-layer graphene, 2-layer graphene, and 1-layer graphene. And this RGO is nominally reduced graphene oxide. So eventually we also reduced it to very high degrees, and we approached conditions which are like closer to graphene nanoplatelets. Okay, so the IV characteristic, if time permit, if I have it in the slide, I would be showing. So here I would take about half a minute to a minute to tell you a few things. So one of the important parts is to look at this window of binding energies from 640 to 660 EV. So this is the window within which Mn2p peaks are expected. So the absence of any peak in this, XPS peak in this window, attests to the fact that there are no manganese residues in our samples. So that is another benefit over and above the older techniques. So while being non-explosive technique, it also did not lead to any Mn residues, and the quality of graphene oxide obtained was high. Another point which like beginning researchers in this area have to be careful about is whenever you are comparing XPS data, like via XPS data, trying to estimate the sp2 fraction. So XPS data essentially talks about the binding energies for various types of bonds. So for example, there would be something corresponding to C double bond C, something corresponding to C single bond C, something corresponding to C single bond O, and so on. So what happens is, via looking at area under the curves for these respective peaks, one can differentiate between the pure sp2-like carbons and sp3 carbons. Okay, so the ratio of sp3 carbons to sp2 carbons could be obtained using XPS, number one. And while doing so, it is very important to make sure that the kind of binding energy values that you use for doing this multi-peak fit has to be as identical as possible between the graphene oxide and the reduced graphene oxide. Because if you don't do it, then just because of its inherent nature of being a multi-peak fit with multi-parameter fit, anything could be fitted to anything else without giving meaningful results. So that is a crucial step which people have to be careful about. And over here, we just summarize the yield for the starting weight of 3 grams of graphite. And as can be seen, like compared to Hammer's method or the Tours method, which is also called the Marcano's method, our method was able to give a much higher yield. And this work was published by Pranay. Okay, so what we went on to do was also to look at theoretically how these wrinkles could be observed, like in a theoretical picture. So what was done was, using density functional theory, we tried to equilibrate structures of graphene sheets. So when we equilibrate a structure of a graphene sheet, we get a flat surface, more or less flat surface in this configuration. Of course, here it is in a solvent which is H2O, H2O. So mild modulations are there, but essentially you can say it to be flat. On the other hand, as soon as we attach oxygen containing functional groups at various carbon atoms, either only at the boundaries or even at the center and boundaries, we could see now that folds, or what we saw as wrinkles or crumples, they started appearing. So like intrinsically, graphene oxide is also having a quasi 2D character. So that is one thing. And this one can compare with the kind of pictures which we generated using atomic force microscopy. Okay, we also went on to do PD-DFT estimation of Raman shifts. And what we observed with is, based on the functional groups which we could see using the FTIR spectroscopy, if we attached such functional groups to the carbon base layer, we could generate like intensities around the D, G, and 2D locations. And as you can see in the next figure, like for slightly different combinations, this peak structure is totally changed. So therefore, like we also try to make a connection with being able to simulate the experimentally observed data. We went on to like demonstrate usage of these graphene oxide for humidity and hydrogen peroxide sensing. So while humidity sensing is crucial from the point of view of soil moisture testing. So soil moisture testing is something which is a very crucial requirement for a large class of people, including say farmers in particular, like considering the large volume requirement for such kind of sensors. In addition, for environmental monitoring in closed spaces, humidity sensing is crucial. So like what we found out was graphene oxide freestanding films were very good at sensing humidity selectively under like appropriate compositing with suitable transition metal oxides. And similarly, like hydrogen peroxide sensing is another important requirement, particularly if we look at food preservation industry. So most of you who would have traveled in IRCTC trains and have had IRCTC food would have come across occasional occurrences of mouth ulcers. So this is because many a times these food packaging contains excess amount of hydrogen peroxide. So hydrogen peroxide is typically put in small food grade quantities to avoid bacterial growth. But as soon as there is an excess of hydrogen peroxide, that quickly causes mouth ulcers. So therefore, good monitoring of packaged food is possible via hydrogen peroxide sensing. So we kind of demonstrated these two things. Not only that, we also went on to show dye selectivity for adsorption of dyes in graphene oxide via suitable suitable alteration of functional groups. So we played around with the functional groups which are found in graphene oxide, and then we made it dye selective, and we were able to separate two cationic dyes from a cationic dye mixture. So that was something which was first of its kind experiments. And here in this figure, like the take home message is, as a function of fraction of OH group, the attractive nature of the dye with the graphene oxide goes into a repulsive interaction. And therefore, like a typical graphene oxide layer does not adsorb a specific dye in lieu of other. So to summarize, we demonstrated an inexpensive route for synthesizing graphene oxide via modification to Hammer's approach. The key modifications involved pre-cooling protocol and also a number of changes in the overall reaction parameters, reactant conditions, etc., which can be, like those who are interested can refer to our paper. And this proposed synthesis approach completely eliminates this explosive nature of the underlying reactions. Not only that, the Tours method also employed highly expensive separation membranes or filtration membranes for preparing high quality graphene oxide. And in our method, we could achieve high quality graphene oxide without using expensive filtration method. So that made it scalable. And high quality graphene oxide was exemplified via the variety of measurements starting from XRD to XPS. And simple reduction protocols were demonstrated with potential applications. So in our group, next we are looking at detailed prospects of graphene oxide and RGO for photovoltaic applications. So in our paper, we have talked about, like paper which I showed just now, we had talked about photovoltaic response of a reduced graphene oxide grown on graphene oxide epi layer. So we are continuing with that work right now. So this would really lead to a very scalable approach for making photovoltaic devices from graphene oxide like this. We are also looking at nature of magnetism in 2D and quasi 2D graphene oxide and reduced graphene oxide samples. Aspects related to wettability of GO and RGO from perspective of end applications. So one such end application is trying to make hydrophobic cloth. Like this has a lot of interest in the COVID scenario, where if you can develop a hydrophobic cloth material, so so people will say that there are already techniques which are making hydrophobic cloth material, but it turns out most of those techniques are using a class of compounds called perfluorinated chemicals, right? So these are like chlorofluorocarbons and other similar compounds. So like these compounds, when used for making any usable item in large scale, are going to have very severe environmental impacts. So therefore, alternate techniques which does not use CFCs are crucial. So like graphene oxide route is one of them. So that's what we are planning. Besides that, graphene oxide and reduced graphene oxide are also ideal candidate systems for neuromorphic computing. So this is being explored by PG students here. And graphene oxide is also an ideal candidate system for sensing biomolecules and for drug delivery. And now we are also focusing on graphene oxide quantum dots. And these are ideal candidates to control protein aggregation for a class of proteins. And similarly, like there are many more possible applications. So I have not actually covered applications like supercapacitor application, which a large across the world are also trying to work on. using reduced graphene oxide. So that would lead to high quality energy storage devices. So typical examples of large scale applications. So why we should talk about graphene oxide? So suppose we are talking about smart home or offices. So energy harvesting from walls, windows and roofs, transparent displays embedded in the windows, photoluminescent ceilings, sensors and displays for perpetual use when Internet of Things becomes a reality, large-scale distributed speakers, and many more. So essentially heating, lighting, sensing, and many more applications. So why I'm picking up this typical example of smart homes offices is because we have to look at the volume of usage. Like when we look at typical applications, these are the applications which are going to have a huge volume of usage. We are going to have homes and offices. Next is we are going to have cars, lots of cars. And Daimler came up with a concept car. So when I say it's a concept car, it is indeed a concept car till now, because a lot of development work around this is going on. And this really provides good like thinking point to start thinking about new materials. So here, graphene related materials based supercapacitors for energy storage, graphene related materials for smart sensors, graphene related materials based solar cells, graphene related materials for composite body, and graphene related materials for composite tires. So like by this kind of a simple thought, Daimler really set the ball rolling for very interesting applications of carbon materials, right? So that is another application. And as we know, transportation is next thing which we use in large volumes. Okay, so this is a slide from Ferrari et al.'s paper. So they had actually projected on various technological issues and the vision part as far as carbon-based materials are going to be done. So on the right-hand side, you can see in the vision, so there is composite, so stronger and multifunctional, optoelectronics, so faster, cheaper and flexible, energy storage, efficient, cheaper and sustainable, and health, ultra sensitive and label free. And they are going to have societal benefits, job and education. And graphene oxide could indeed be one such material. And technical goals with respect to graphene related materials could be classified into three following levels. So at the material level, there is still a lot of work desirable for discovering new layered materials. So apart from graphene, like people have already started working on things like phosphorine, silicene, molybdenum diselenide, and so on. So interesting new materials have to be looked into. And not only that, interesting new materials from the graphene family also needs to be looked into. So reliable, reproducible, sustainable, and safe large-scale production of graphene-related materials. So this was another material level challenge which was put forward. So this is kind of a follow-up of this discussion of Ferrari et al. And as you would have seen in 2018, we also ended up contributing to this part via making scalable approaches or developing scalable approaches for making graphene oxide. At component level, identification of new device concepts enabled by GRMs, identifications of component technologies that utilize graphene related materials, and electronic technologies comprising high frequency electronics, optoelectronics, spintronics, and sensors. So that is the kind of work which is required at the component level. And finally, at the system integration level, route to bring components and structures based on graphene related materials to systems capable of providing new functionalities and open new application areas is crucial. New concepts for integrating graphene related materials in existing technology platforms, and integration routes for nanocomposites, flexible electronics, and energy applications. So these are kind of future directions which people are supposed to be interested in, and a lot of youngsters in this audience will end up solving many of these issues and contribute to many of these issues. So final question is, will graphene related materials really succeed? So like my take would be a yes, because they form a part of a golden quadrilateral. So first of all, graphene related materials, they offer significant performance enhancements. Second is they have ease of adaptation. So they are there are scalable approaches. Not only that, they can be integrated into existing manufacturing technologies. There are wide range of applications. So like this is generic in character. So as you would have seen from smart homes, offices, transport to sensors for IoT, actuators for IoT, and so on. So graphene related materials play an important role there. And finally, new value propositions. So this is going to be a disruptive materials technology, because a lot of other material systems, say for example, if we are thinking about thermoelectric energy harvesting, right, which was like proposed as one of the interesting methods for future technologies. So over there, waste is converted to useful electricity using thermoelectric materials, and the most famous or most popular thermoelectric materials are based on bismuth and tellurium. So one can see, if you have a choice between bismuth and tellurium, which are highly toxic and not so abundant, and carbon, like the choice is naturally going in the favor of carbon. So finally, thank you. So like it has been great interacting with you. I apologize for the initial difficulty with connection, and I would be happy to answer questions live. And also, if there are questions which need descriptive answers, I can communicate with you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. And I'm confident that the students have learned a lot of new concepts. And I'm also sorry for you face some problems in the beginning because of some technical restrictions or something like that. And we will remove that initial glitch before uploading it to our college channel. So since Dr. Ajay Thakur is now open for the discussion, I request Dr. Vikram Singh, Dr. Thiru, and Ms. Shalomin Sharma to kindly compile, manage, and put the questions by our participants before Dr. Ajay Thakur. I can see a lot of questions in the chat box. So I hope you don't mind selecting few of them, and rest of the questions can be dealt later on if they seems to be descriptive.
So Sonal, what can be done is this chat transcript could be sent. Like it is possible to save it as a text file. So in general, you can share the chat transcript with me, and let us see how many questions we can take right now.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir, I'll do it. So meanwhile, I'm sharing. Dr. Vikram, please, you ask at least few of the questions, or Shalomin.
Thank you, Dr. Sonal. It was very nice topic and presentation, and how much it was interesting it is being shown and reflected by the queries spread in the chat box. So it is not possible to take all the queries right now. So I take some queries to Professor Thakur. Actually, one student is asking, is there any specific reason why graphene is grown on silicon?
On silicon, okay. So, okay, let me answer it. So what happens is, see, I talked of this golden quadrilateral, right? And we talked about the second part, which is ease of adaptation, right? So if you see most of our current electronics, right, the latest electronic gadgets that we are using, they are primarily silicon based, right? So there is a silicon wafer at the heart of it. And then we have a lot of interesting process steps via which we go through applications, right? Making maybe different types of transistors, and then collection of transistors into ICs, and then so on and so forth, right? So in order to have this ease of adaptation issue alive, right? Researchers have a tendency to test things first on silicon, right? So there's no other reason, prima facie. So people also grow things on glass. People also grow things on ITO, particularly ITO glass, because that is another adapted technology. ITO glass is widely used in large display screens, flexible electronics, and so on and so forth. So even on ITO substrates, people grow graphene and also graphene oxide and graphene related materials. So one of the best substrates to grow graphene is hexagonal boron nitride. Okay, what happens is silicon, however high quality a silicon you will use, still it has a nominal roughness, right, which is much larger than hexagonal boron nitride. And this high quality of graphene in terms of its very high mobility is crucially dependent on the intrinsic roughness of the substrate. So the best choice, if we are looking at from the superlative properties of graphene, the best choice of substrate would be hexagonal boron nitride. So now people are trying to come up with this idea of making van der Waals superlattices, okay, or van der Waals heterostructures, not superlattices, van der Waals heterostructures. So over there, what they do is, so when we say van der Waals structures, we are meaning structures which are attached to each other via van der Waals interaction. So whenever we are transferring graphene onto an Si substrate with a thin layer of SiO2 on top of it, the main interaction which is responsible for strongly holding graphene onto the substrate is van der Waals interaction. So now people are trying that if they can make hexagonal boron nitride and then make graphene and make van der Waals multi-layered structures of this. They're also trying to make molybdenum sulfide, phosphorine, and a wide class of other 2D materials, and trying to see if permutation combination of various van der Waals structures could lead to interesting new functionalities. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah,
So
I hope it will be clear to the audience.
in short, the answer would be silicon, because we want ease of adaptation to existing silicon electronics.
Next query is that actually I am also interested in that every new discovery has some negative phases also. So what audience want to know is asking, after the discovery of the synthetic plastic in 1907, everyone said that it will be reversed to revolutionize the world. But in fact, it is degrading the environment. How do you think? Graphite would not be like that.
So that's why, so at the outset, if you see my initial slide where I talked about this progression from Stone Age to Silicon Age, right? I had put a location where I had asked us as responsible researchers to put constraints at the beginning when we are trying to develop new materials, right? At the outset, we need to put constraints. So the constraints would be from the point of view of toxicity. The constraint would be from the point of view of cost of the process. The constraint would be from the point of view of scalability. And this is the same sense in which I finished the talk when I said carbon-based thermoelectric materials would be, or thermoelectric systems would be much better than bismuth telluride-based thermoelectric systems. Eventually, if we are able to beat the performance specifications of bismuth telluride and meet the quality requirements. So therefore, more research on these systems are definitely required. So carbon-based systems are one such class where the impact on environment are supposed to be nominal. Okay, but at the same time, because these are nanomaterials, right? And so at smaller scale, they are highly reactive. Okay, so there are a lot of studies being taking place, which are trying to really elucidate the bad effects of carbon-based nanomaterials, if any. And to a great extent, studies have shown it to be benign. Okay, so they are much better than most of the other materials that we choose.
There are a lot of questions in chat room that you can see it.
Sir, वैसे I have sent you that chat file. So
Ah.
I think, Shalomin, would you like to ask one or two questions from the chat box? Then rest of the questions can be answered by sir later on. Or
Okay,
Dr.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the talk. It was really enriching. So, one of the students has asked the questions: do the wrinkles of folds indicated impurity, or are these normal even in the purest form?
Okay, so that's what I wanted to convey, and that's why I started with the Landau-Peyerl's argument. Okay, so it so happens, suppose I have a sheet of, I have a 2D sheet, right? I have a 2D sheet, fine. And what happens is there are atoms lined up on top of the sheet. Just imagine them to be at angstrom scale, right? This, although this is kind of physical dimensions. So now there are atoms aligned all along. And now what Landau's argument says is, if we are confining these atoms to exist in 2-dimension or lower than 2 dimensions, then each of these atoms at any finite temperature will start wiggling around. Okay. And when this, till the time this wiggling around is smaller than the lattice spacing, suppose there are 2 atoms. So, okay, so let me use some other prop to show this. So imagine tip of these 2 pens to be 2 atoms. And this is the atomic spacing between them. So the spacing at which I have kept the 2 pens, that is the typical lattice spacing in a typical arrangement. Now, because of any finite temperature, they start vibrating about each other. Till the time this vibration is smaller than the distance between these 2 atoms, right? This material is going to be stable. But what happens is in 2 dimension, these vibrations go haywire. Okay, so you can see this, right? These vibrations are like haywire. So this, if we imagine atoms at the tip, they are moving far larger distances than the distances, distance which is supposed to be the atomic spacing. Okay, so therefore this material intrinsically becomes unstable. Fine. So now what are the ways by which it can become more stable? So one of the ways is if this material goes onto a substrate. So when it goes onto a substrate, this elastic energy cost could be transferred onto the substrate. So whenever like there is a thermal fluctuation, so 2 atoms move apart, so their bonds are being compressed and pulled apart, right? So there is an elastic energy cost for this. So now if the underlying substrate shares that elastic energy cost, so these will vibrate less vigorously. Okay, and then what happens is this material is more stable. Another way is when this material tries to not, so instead of shaking here, it will try to shake out of plane, right? So then what happens is their interatomic distance is fixed, but they are now shaking out of plane. And when collectively this happens, this leads to wrinkles, right? So like that's another way of taking care of elastic energy cost by forming wrinkles. So it's not about purity of the material, but 2D materials or materials which are below 2 dimension, they are theoretically expected to be unstable. And therefore, in order for them to be stable, they find out ways. And one of the ways is via wrinkling, via forming wrinkles.
Okay, so Dr. Thiru, would you like to ask some question from the chat box asked by students?
Okay, madam. Dr. Sonal, madam, thank you. So, thank you, Dr. Ajay Thakur, sir. And there is interesting question. Are graphene-related drugs safer for humans? I also want to listen the answer.
Okay, so here we have to think about like in what context are we talking of graphene-related drugs? So first of all, if it is headache, there are already much better drugs which are available, right? So if you're talking of headache or fever or toothache or eyesight related issues, there are already well-developed chemical formulations. So when we talk of applications in the area of drugs and medicines, right, they are very focused applications. So one such thing, let me just point out. So most of you would have heard about this disease called Alzheimer's, right? And also would have heard about another disease called Parkinson's, right? So these are kind of diseases which are neurological in origin in some way, right? And they are related to aggregation of these biomolecules called beta amyloids and alpha synuclein respectively. So these alpha synuclein will form cluster, they will aggregate and form kind of plaques inside the brain. And same way beta amyloid will form plaques inside the brain. Okay, and when they form plaques, plaques are the similar thing which happens on tooth, right? On teeth you see teeth plaques, right? These yellow colored plaques which are formed on teeth. In a similar manner, inside brain cells also, like in certain regions of brain, like plaques are formed via aggregation of these molecules, which are otherwise very useful. So alpha synuclein is an important molecule for for information to be processed by brain. And same way, beta amyloid is a useful molecule, but their aggregation sometimes due to age and sometimes due to other pathologies, right? That's a bad thing. So over here, graphene oxide is supposed to be one interesting candidate, or more appropriately, reduced graphene oxide quantum dots. They are supposed to be an interesting candidate. So what they do is, so these graphene oxides or reduced graphene oxides have very interesting sites on them called anionic sites, right? So these are negatively charged sites where cationic functional groups could bind on. Okay, and if we are talking about any other materials forming such quantum dots, they have a high degree of toxicity, whereas carbon-based materials are relatively safer. So these carbon-based materials are able to breach something called the blood-brain barrier. So you would have known that blood generally does not have a free way into brain, right? So accordingly, why not so? Because a lot of pathogens could have otherwise gone into brain along with the blood plasma, right? So these nanoparticles, which are these quantum dots, in this case carbon-based quantum dots, they are able to breach this blood-brain barrier and get inside brain, right? And then these alpha synuclein or beta amyloid, they have a very high kind of, I would say, affinity for getting attached onto graphene oxide surfaces or reduced graphene oxide surfaces. Okay, so instead of them aggregating and forming plaques, they can be collected onto this graphene oxide substrates, and then like graphene oxide quantum dots, and then methodologies have to be found out to remove this from the affected areas. So they are locally injected and then removed. Of course, like initial results are really promising in this area from several international groups, and therefore it's an exciting area to work on. However, the point is, like several other drug candidates, they require comprehensive like protocols and comprehensive steps before they become a reality. So to answer the main question, we are talking about drug applications in niche areas, not necessarily like conventional drugs which you take on a daily basis. But at the same time, like graphene oxide matrix, like people are trying to make scaffolds of reduced graphene oxide in a manner that controlled drug release could be achieved. So in such cases, what happens is, we know, for example, TB is an important like disease in our country, which needs to be handled very carefully. And one of the simple ways to curb TB or win over TB is if the patients have their medicines very regularly. Okay, but in most of the rural areas, you will find that these TB patients, they skip doses, right? So they're not really very regular with their medicine doses. Or in similar situations, wherever a disease requires very regular doses without the patient really remembering to take the dose. Under such circumstances, this controlled release of drug is a new paradigm which people are thinking. And for that also, graphene oxide scaffolds are considered to be a very interesting host matrix. Because what would happen is drugs would be stored inside it in much larger quantity than a single doses, but then this would be released periodically in smaller quantities. So the patient does not have to remember of taking dose every day, like every month, so that period could be increased. So taking a dose every week would be good enough. So that's another area where these interventions in drug could be implemented using graphene oxide basis.
Okay, thank you, sir. Since we have got a lot of questions from our enthusiastic student participants, and students, I have shared this chat to Dr. Ajay Thakur, and we will definitely try to share the answers with you. So now I would like to head towards the end of this webinar by asking Dr. Pramod Kumar to please propose a formal vote of thanks. Dr. Pramod Kumar, over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Sonal sir. Good evening, everyone. It's time for formal vote of thanks. It's my privilege to propose a formal vote of thanks for this event. First of all, I would like to thank the principal sir for his continuous support and guidance for this event. On behalf of the Department of Physics, I would like to thank the invited speaker, Professor Ajay Thakur, Associate Professor from IIT Patna, for his interactive and very interesting lecture. Sir, you speak about the two-dimensional nature of carbon materials. So it's a very multi-dimensional field. I think many other two-dimensional material are also available, but graphene is such a wonderful field which is having a lot of applications. So in this regard, I'm sure this lecture has enriched the knowledge of the audience in this field. Also, a special thanks to all the retired faculty members of our department for their blessings. Also, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the guests present today, especially Dr. J.K. Sharma, retired faculty member from our department, Dr. Susan Varghese from Department of Chemistry, St. John's College, Agra, Professor V.P. Singh from IBS, Khandari, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Agra, and other faculty members from various institutes. I would also like to thank our head of the department, Dr. L.M. Thomas, and other faculty members for making this event a grand success. A special warm thanks to Dr. Sonal Sir for taking initiative to organize this event, and also to Mr. Bhaibhav Sharan for his technical support to make the conduction of the meeting very smooth. Last but not the least, I would also like to thank all the participants and dear students for their keen participation. Thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sonal, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
With the permission of our principal, sir, and Dr. Ajay Thakur, can I close this meeting now?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
So, Dr. Sahai, you can try to maybe segregate the questions if you can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll
Right.
do it. Yeah.
And then like if they can be clustered into some specific questions, that would be easier. Otherwise,
Yes.
I'm also going to look at it.
I don't know. I'll do it.
Sent.
I'll do it, sir. I'll do it.
I hope you have already sent me the mail, right?
Yeah, I have sent, but I'll.
So I will also go through it.
Yes,
If
sir.
you are able to segregate specific questions, that would really help.
Yeah, I will do it for sure, sir. Okay, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sai.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.